Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today.
No, before we even welcome the audience, Michael Bishop from OpenAds.ai, your co-founder lived in your attic?
Attic is an extremely generous way of putting it. I live in a New York City one bedroom, and it has these like really ludicrously high, like 14-foot ceilings, and there's a storage nook, you could call it, like above my kitchen, where you have to climb like a 12-foot ladder to get up there, and it's like 6 feet deep. And my co-founder like put like a mattress pad up there and was sleeping in it like every day for a year while we were initially hacking out the early days of this. And I had a perfectly good couch. He did this entirely of his own volition. I think he likes nesting.
Clearly, I've seen that stuff. Like when they do the New York City apartment walkthrough, like you won't believe this 600 square foot apartment or 400 square foot apartment has 2 people and all this cool stuff in it. I've seen that, but I've never actually been in one.
Yeah. Oh, I could probably like rent it out for about $1,000 a month if I wanted. Real estate's crazy these days, but it might be a little unethical to do that.
Eric's like, from my New Jersey beachfront mansion, I scroll on the Instagram and it shows me how the poors are living in the urban environment.
For the record, I never took the ladder away while he was sleeping. Like
that's good.
It's an extension of trust.
All right, so we already got the installed out, so the pod can start.
It's a team building exercise.
All right, go ahead, Joe.
Welcome to Open Market. You know what you're listening to. It's a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. Eric and I are joined by Michael Bishop, the co-founder and CTO of OpenAds. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
You're like the voice of God. Hope this gets ironed out in post-production. Otherwise, you're going to sound way better than we do.
The audience can't see, but Michael has a very professional sounding mic. Like, you should probably just run the podcast.
Michael, tell us what we're talking about today. Just kidding. Joe, what's going on? What are we doing?
We want to talk about AI and the future of ads. But Michael, just like we did with CERN a couple weeks ago, fellow AI startup founder in the ad martech space, why don't we just talk about by diving into the business a little bit? Why don't you tell us about OpenAds?
Sure. Put it simple, we are creating and delivering unique ads to every impression in real time. Got to dive into that a little bit because I think the first question is, how does that differ from dynamic creative optimization? And the way I would put it is DCO is picking from a finite number of variants. And what we're doing is tapping into the ability for AI to make a completely unique ad. So given it an impression, a context, a user, that ad has never been seen before. And that's something that was not technologically possible before large language models, and honestly was not feasible financially or inference time at scale until even like the last couple of months even.
Michael, there are a few different ways that like generative ads could manifest. Like it could be on generative AI platforms like OpenAI. It could be like against the content contextually. It could be on publisher content, especially as that content itself potentially becomes more dynamic with AI. Or it could just be, anywhere on the internet. And it could just be, as you said, sort of the next generation of DCO. Like instead of picking from options, you just have a completely generative ads. Which of those opportunities are you pursuing or are you most excited about or seeing traction with?
Pursuing all of the above. And one thing that I should have mentioned previously is not just generating ads, but we are stitching LLMs into the ad creative itself. Like what we have is like actually like branded assets, the creative voice of the brand in their product data, their marketing collateral, and whether it's like suggested questions like or free-form follow-up chat, you being able to just like pull for information from the brand from an ad. In terms of breaking down these sort of platforms this can serve on, there is definitely the like consumer-facing generative AI opportunity, which I think you could describe as sort of a hybrid between search and the open web, where what you have is users putting in effectively a search string, giving you the context for exactly what they're looking for. And the ability to transact on it, like not just in a sort of rigid keyword basis, but completely freeform. What is the best ad based on the user intent, what we know about them, what you can extrapolate about this opportunity. And like one of the really cool things we've been able to test is not just advertiser selection, but testing against like pre-generated static creative versus tuned in real time to that search input. That real time personalization leads to more than 50% higher click-through rates. Like consumer-facing AI is one thing. Sort of traditional publishers and traditional media, like you can treat it sort of as like an expansion to contextual targeting. We're definitely seeing some interest from some of the like major news and media orgs around this as a like high-value ad unit that they can upsell to their advertisers as something premium, as something super highly engaging, as like very custom branded experiences. So seeing a like surprising amount of traction there. And sort of the third pillar of it is retail media, like commerce, shopping. And that's something we definitely want to get into, but small startup, finite amount of time, that's more future facing.
What's the biggest opportunity in ad tech as it relates to generative AI?
So again, I think we can break this down into sort of the platform shift versus the technological opportunity, because both of those are big opportunities in very different ways. So in terms of the platform shift, that's where you see sort of the first cracks in Google search market share, for example. Sort of this question of how are people going to be aggregating and pulling for information? Answer engines, generative experiences. Like I think no one has a solid answer on what the future of that's going to look like. But even seeing 3% market share dinged from Google in the super early days, it suggests it's going to be massive. And then separately, there's the technological opportunity, where I think you definitely see what like the Vanderhooks are doing with Viant. And there's a ton of opportunity just to automate and add efficiency to sort of the existing layers of the ad stack. But separately, I think the question that's worth asking, and something that has heretofore been underexplored, is what is possible now that wasn't possible before? And that, I think, is a big part of like what we're here to talk about today is what can we do now that we couldn't do before, whether it's in ad targeting and creative generation, personalization, optimization, in terms of sort of really the question around what is an ad and what can an ad be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the platform dimension of this itself will be a giant business, right? Like the global search advertising market is, I think, over $300 billion a year. I think Google alone does like 160 or something like that. So one could certainly imagine that the OpenAI or Perplexity businesses combined will be of a similar scale eventually. If they're not, you guys tell me why.
No, I think it's viable. And the way that sort of we think about this, like putting it into historical perspective, is ad tech is exciting when there are platform shifts, whether it's the dawn of mobile, the dawn of CTV. The really big ad tech companies and the big exits are born sort of at that cusp of a platform shift where the incumbents are struggling with the innovator's dilemma of that, like they have their billions of revenue locked up in executing what they've been used to executing, and so they're not able to move as fast to adjust to a new format where the old tech doesn't work as well or at all. And there is an opportunity for new players to play in the space. And like what makes this particularly exciting is it's not just a platform shift, it's a technology shift. And that's something where we haven't seen those happen at the same time, probably since the DoubleClick era.
I think that's right. This is an audio podcast, but I'm smiling because I don't follow a lot of people on Twitter. Michael, you and Joe, you're both in my follow list. And Michael, you say a lot of cool stuff, a lot of stuff that I don't understand, but once in a while you drop a banger. Ad tech is exciting during platform shifts is an absolute banger. So that might even be the title of this episode. Do we think that there's just a direct line for every dollar Google loses, some LLM is going to gain? Or is the fundamental nature of getting an answer, right, versus doing a search where you have the opportunity to serve a whole lot of stuff, including a whole lot of ads? Does this mean that getting answers, right, because I don't even call it search anymore, is going to mean a different business model and one that might not be just as easy to build, such a monolith and giant business that Google did? Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think spitting off the cuff on wild speculation, I think it absolutely changes. And I think one of the signs you can look at here is the fact that publishers are suing Perplexity and suing OpenAI. It's sort of this problem of like the zero-click search dilemma, where the less friction there is between a user and pulling for information, the less opportunity there is for advertising. And the less opportunity is for those publishers to monetize via display ads on their sites. And what you already see startups popping up to deal with bits and pieces of this, like Tollbit, ProRata. And like I think we actually wrote up a big like market manifesto around like what it would take for like an industry collaboration for revenue sharing and attribution between publishers and like aggregation engines is how we were referring to it. And I think it was definitely premature. It broke Ari Papero's brain a little bit to try to read some of it. But that's the future of where things are going, I think, is that sort of the world where Google existed in sort of a handshake agreement between publishers. We'll give you traffic, you monetize via ads. And really the like answer engine play is almost backstepping them to say, we are changing the terms, pray that we don't alter them further. And you get these AI startups being sued because the publishers exist at Google's whimsy, like it is their lifeline. They can't sue Google. But I do think it's precedent setting for this idea of like duplicating content or effectively duplicating content such that it removes the need to go to an underlying publisher site. I think that being unmonetized and not revenue shared with the publisher is not going to last.
I think there are two dimensions to this in terms of the potential disparity between AI and search as we've known it over the last 10 to 20 years. So one is sort of univocal answers versus a sort of polyphonous array of possibilities, right? So it's like, just tell me what it is. Like, give me the one thing. As you said, Michael, like that doesn't lend itself to as much search surface area as like, and here are the 10 possible things you might want to know or look at, which also has like devastating consequences for display revenue because, again, people aren't going to be navigating to all those different properties. There's a deeper problem, though, I think, which is that if you transition even from like right now, people are using AI sort of like the next generation of search where they're like, give me the answer. But you could go beyond that from give me the answer, which still involves a moment where the various ads can be displayed to just do it for me, just make the decision on my behalf. And when you get to that point, which is like the real like AI agent paradigm, then I really see the trouble with ads because then you're no longer having the user sort of put text in and like examine an array of options. They're just having the AI do the thing. And then the only opportunity for the advertising would be in potentially reaching the agent itself, which is like a whole other debate that's going on right now.
Exactly. And I think that's something that is definitely going to happen, like very much so in like online shopping, e-commerce, in like pricing, personalized discounts, in like really like it almost becomes more of this like real-time like bidding-esque optimization problem of like if you're pulling for information, okay, here's a sponsored opportunity, what makes it actually good for the user then? Like, are they offering a better discount? Are they offering something more suited to the user's preferences? Like, I think that sort of like agent-to-agent, quote-unquote, advertising is almost not even advertising as we traditionally conceive of it. Like, I don't think ads are going away by any means. There will always be a surface area to put advertising, but some of how things have been monetized previously is very likely to shift more to this sense of price discovery, price optimization, and personalization. And that is very exciting, and I would say a little parallel to what we're working on directly right now, other than under the hood in terms of like existing advertiser selection and optimization for like click-through rates and ROAS.
Well, and we also know Silicon Valley has a huge bias like against ads and for like sort of SaaS and subscription type models. And so I wonder like if they can have the AI agent and they're like, look, we're going to try to charge people, a SaaS type fee for an agent over like the information being free and then like generating revenue in the form of ads. I imagine they would go for that. But that gets into like a deeper conversation about that I'd like to ask you to comment on, Michael, in terms of as someone like operating at the intersection of like the Silicon Valley AI ecosystem and the New York adtech ecosystem. What are some of the tensions you're seeing there in terms of how this will play out?
Absolutely. And I do think that Silicon Valley has broadly an ideological, almost irrational distaste for advertising. Like what we've heard from a bunch of like prospective clients is like, oh, wow, I didn't realize ads didn't have to suck. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do here is almost evangelize for the idea that you can make better ads. I think in terms of user behavior, you can look at, for example, the fall of Neva. Some things users are used to not paying for. And even in cases where like there are subscription monetizations, I think the sort of the evolutionary line of that is towards freemium models. Like Netflix, for example, started out subscription only, and they eventually introduced an ad tier. Like that's just a matter of like It's a financial optimization problem where most services that are purely subscription would probably be better off freemium, and it's a matter of at what point in the growth and scaling curve, is that actually the optimal play?
For those unfamiliar, Neeva was a search engine, essentially like an alternative to Google, started by a former, believe it or not, Google ad exec, Sridhar Ramaswamy, and ultimately it was acquired and shut down by Snowflake, and Sridhar is now the CEO of Snowflake. So, Michael, to your point, an alternative to Google that is freemium or paid, that's not the big idea.
No, I think the big idea here, I would say, is almost that we're agnostic to what form the internet takes 6 months from now, 2 years from now. We think it's absolutely going to change. And sort of the principles that are definitely going to be happening are sort of, if you look at the dynamics of how LLMs work, how like human language input works, how we are measuring new forms of context and ad selection, that's sort of the consistent factor. It's not necessarily just about web pages, but about a different kind of input and output, and how do you make ads relevant in that? So whether this ends up being Perplexity, Google Answers, etc., are sort of the final form of that, or if there are things that we just haven't imagined yet, we are very unopinionated about what that looks like. Either way, it's going to need a monetization layer, and it's going to be ads to some degree.
You are an ad tech guy. You formerly worked at Moat before doing this. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct. I was there from relatively early days, up through the Oracle acquisition.
Got it. What'd you do after that?
Took a year soul searching, traveling around, and found my co-founder.
Grew your hair long?
Grew my hair long, adtech Jesus a little bit. And found my co-founder in an alleyway in Stonetown, Zanzibar. We started talking about his background in political tech, my background in ad tech, and we started jamming after that. We launched a small political tech startup leading up to 2020. It went disastrously. We learned a ton. We decided to do something that actually made money after that, and moved towards e-commerce and towards, I would say, a very similar idea to what is still fueling what we're doing now. This optimization problem of incentives drive what content gets made and how users experience the internet. And that is the ideological strain that I have kept from the Moat days, is this laser focus on what you measure drives what outcomes you get. And with the context of us being at a platform shift, being at a technology shift, and looking at the history of Google was very aware of the tension between search and ads. We look at this very similarly of, okay, let's be very thoughtful, very considerate of how do we make sure that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we don't have sort of this proliferation of a slop engine, because that's what is financially optimal for people to make and for people to game the system.
You're such an interesting dude. Okay, so let's talk about ad tech. How does all this stuff affect ad tech, right? So you get your platform shift. We talked about that. Now let's talk about the technology shift and what's the implication for this entire ecosystem, and what is it going to look like on the other side of this? And you choose your time frame. Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? Whatever.
Okay, so this is definitely a complicated one, and I think what we can do here is, as is vogue in AI chain of thought, let's break it down step by step. First, I think we can all agree that VCPM and CPC are broken metrics in a lot of ways. They're overly gameable. Last touch attribution is kind of a joke, and it leads to misincentivized outcomes or just outright gaming it with cookie bombing and that sort of thing. At the end of the day, the point of a currency is for a brand to be able to measure that they got what they paid for. Viewability was a big step change here, where brands intuitively just got it, that they were paying for something and they were not receiving the product they were paying for. And so sort of I would say the strain tying all of this together, whether it's curation, whether it's MFA, whether it's brand safety, it's sort of the same sense of brands not getting what they paid for. So that's why I've always been, held that the MFA discussion is misguided. What we have is publishers acting in their logical financial best interest. And rather than trying to shame them or saying okay, let's draw an arbitrary line between what is MFA and what's not MFA, follow the broken incentives and fix the broken incentives. So if a brand would justifiably be upset to see their ad placement as less valuable based on what the content's about, the domain reputation, the ad load, the ad to content ratio, the refresh rate, intrusive ad formats, pop-ups, redirects, jank, that should be accounted for at the currency level. With me so far?
Michael, for that to work, there needs to be a very close connection between media quality and quality of outcomes, right? Isn't that part of what you're talking about? Or is that a fair way to say it, that ideally to make MFAs go away, you put the quality of media into the quality of outcome, or you develop an ability to help advertisers understand the correlation between those things so that they just naturally pay more for the high quality experience that we all want publishers to provide.
That's absolutely part of it. But I would say that's two legs of the spectrum and leaving out the third one. And this is something that I was trying to get the Oracle execs on board back in the Moat days on, is emphasizing we're not measuring creative quality. And that's the third pillar that is really underserved, is we don't even have proxies for what is a good ad. No one clicks display ads online. Like, we know that. And part of what we're doing is showing how do you actually make good ads? How do you align more with the user experience? And in terms of the metrics we're seeing so far, that you can, in fact, get people to click ads if you make them helpful and informative and useful. Like, we're seeing as high as 3.5% click-through rates on some of our initial partners. And that is bonkers for what is competing with effectively open web banners. So something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about and trying to work out how to implement at a technical level is how to back all of this conversation into a single coherent concept. I'm not there yet. I'll be honest about that. This is not at the level of something that
I thought it was coming.
A standardized currency. We're not at currency. We're at the stage of describing the ideal that we want to build the currency towards. And the way I would phrase it is the Platonic ideal of attention should be to minimize the necessary mental activation energy, the cognitive load, the impact it has on user agency that an ad presents. You want that as low as possible. You want the amount of friction as low as possible. In the limit, a good ad is just content that the user didn't know they wanted to see. The form factor of it should be similar to the content. It should be contextually relevant. It should be mindful of the user's needs, mindset, behavior, interests. It shouldn't be disruptive, flashy, attention grabbing, and shouldn't try to psychologically hack and manipulate the user. All these are sort of some of the aspects that go into what we should be measuring, because that aligns the user experience with creative quality with outcomes. And yep, that's a lot of words. Unpacking the full picture, I think, is really important, though, because this is the coalescence of everything I learned from years at Moat, everything I've learned in my project since. It's okay. Here's the point. If you make it financially optimal for ads to align with users, you get a better internet. It's that simple, and that's the core of what we're doing here.
It's about, to use another Silicon Valley term, it's about going back to first principles and thinking, what do we really want to measure? We want to measure a quality. Okay, what's a quality outcome? It's influencing the user, it's generating, or consumer, it's generating brand affinity, and obviously, in many cases, it's generating incremental sales. That is how we need to sort of, we go from there and we work backward to say, okay, creative quality is part of that. Media quality is part of that. You see companies like Adelaide, trying to isolate parts of this equation. That's why they focus on media quality, where media is defined as the real estate that your ad is running on, and not creative, as they're trying to isolate it and actually get to something real, as opposed to last touch attribution, which is a lot of convoluted machinations to try to arrive at the understanding of whether you drove a sale, but we all know it's deeply flawed. So yeah, I do think we need to rethink that from the ground up. You mentioned AI ads being more effective, and so I can see AI altering the creative quality part of the equation. But how do you see, if at all, AI affecting our ability to measure those various inputs?
So one of the things that we're doing right now is the fact that we've integrated LLM chat into ads. You now have signals beyond just sort of the traditional attention signals. It's not just interactions and clicks. You have people following chats, being able to flow through conversation trees and figure out, okay, where in the funnel are they? What suggestions actually help push them through the funnel? What issues are coming up frequently for certain brands? Do you have people asking a Dell ad, wait, aren't MacBooks just better? Really what you have is sort of this infinite vector space of possibility, more so than finite discrete signals now.
Yeah, so the learning and the ability to assess sort of the interaction that's happening in relation to the ad will expand drastically in scope. So you get a lot more signal and maybe a better assessment.
Similar to how Sincere is an ad telemetry company, you have plenty of companies out there for install us and measure all the interactions with your site. And I think this sort of gets into the question of what is an ad? What is the future of an ad? I think it's much more dynamic freeform experiences, more so website building, experience building, than just here's an image, please click on it. And that's sort of the thing that I think a lot of the ad tech industry hasn't quite caught up to realizing yet, is we are not beholden to the world that Google has built in the sandbox that we're playing in. Like we still talk in terminology left over from the newspaper days, like above the fold, below the fold, full bleed. Like this is a legacy of like 2 generations previous of advertising. And I think in general, a lot of us get more stuck in like what is possible based on existing constraints rather than, as you say, first principles. What should this be?
To me, like ad martech really feels like a continuum. And when ad tech people try to be aspirational, they tend to talk about experiences. You see this from all like the data companies like Merkle, Epsilon, Experian. Like they'll talk about connections or experiences or something like that. And that is a way to frame what we're talking about, is that AI would be the technological advancement that will realize this paradigm shift that the ad tech industry has been gesturing toward for a long time, but that we all know from just a consumer standpoint is like kind of bullshit. Like you can talk about experiences and connections, but like I'm not having experiences and connections when I'm seeing ads on like a random media site. And so the question is, will AI actually allow us through the generative creative capabilities and also measurement and optimization, more signal to foster those experiences that ad tech has long promised but not delivered on?
I think that's already happening. Like one of the examples I'd point to on, like, again, to come back to the platform shift metaphor, for mobile, what you had was what was referred to as the flashlight app era, where we had probably 2 years of people building and tinkering and like iterating on like calculators and flashlights before like the killer social apps really came out. We are in the flashlight app era right now. And you're starting to see the first signs of people building experiences with AI that go beyond the flashlight app era. Like one example I point to here is a small startup called WebSim, where it's almost more a toy project right now. But what it is you can describe any website you want to see, and it will make a hallucination of it in real time. Like if you want a website for a leaderboard for competitive bird watchers, it's essentially like shit posting as a service. And I would say the tech is not there yet to realize that same kind of pattern for ads, but that is where it's going, and that is what to expect, is being limited more by creativity than by technical bottlenecks, of just being able to describe what you want to see and spin it up far faster, far easier.
Yeah, Sam Altman made the news. I don't think he expected this, one line or maybe a couple lines to make the news in advertising ad tech circles last year, like he did. But basically, it was a throwaway comment that was, effectively like 95% of what ad agencies do is going to be, fully automated and done better by AI.
Yeah.
That sounds a little bit like what you're saying.
I don't think ad agencies are going to die out. I think they are going to change. Like, I think it's going to be a much more technical outfit, much more of this like crafting custom experiences, like more of a like web dev shop almost, rather than sort of the like relic of the Mad Men era of like human creativity and sort of this like long cycle, high touch, like creative expression. Like, frankly, we can iterate faster. We can iterate to much more personalized and infinitely variable content. So I don't expect the role of the agency to go away, but I think they should be taking a very hard look at what is available in the tooling right now and where do they expect things to go in 6 months and 2 years and 5 years.
That's so fascinating because we had Soren on, and Soren's thought is generally aligned with what you said, right? Which is the role is going to radically change. His view is, the Mad Men era comes back. Specifically, as we think about the show, right? If you guys and the listeners watch the show, like this was about like the big idea, the creative, the like having taste. His view is the future of the agency is that, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but your view is that they are actually way more technical, adept, and able to kind of take client ideas, utilize these tools, and make them come to life, which is slightly different.
I would say I probably agree with that. That the limiting factor is, as taste is a good way of framing this, where if the limiting factor frequently now is like technical ability, is data quality, is the transacting in existing systems, shifting towards the limiting quality being taste, creative expression, and ability to execute novel things. Like I would say that is a fair prediction that I would get behind.
it's almost like the middle gets emptied out, and they do some sort of like the technical work and like navigating the technology on the behalf of brands. But then they also do like the very high level, like brand strategy work of figuring out like, what are the guardrails we're going to put down for AI to iterate inside of?
Absolutely. And that kind of ties into what we're doing too, where the minimum amount of brand interaction to get a campaign running is, here's a link, scrape the site, like completely generate an ad with no advertiser interaction whatsoever. But the ceiling is much, much higher than that, getting into like much more nuances of how they want to tune it, if they're like strategies for like micro campaigns or like particular product sets or catalogs for particular guided experiences, like making the floor so much easier to get started and the ceiling so much higher for what they're capable of is, I would say, the broad pattern to expect.
What does ad tech get wrong about AI today? Because you're so far ahead of like most of what we think about ad tech, right? Like programmatic and commerce and CTV, and you're just out here operating in, operating in the future, basically. So what is the ecosystem as it exists today get wrong about AI? What should they be doing? What should they be thinking about?
I would say maybe the biggest thing is, again, just being like overly boxed into how things currently work. Like sort of this frame of, we don't have to exist in the world that currently exists. Like I hear from people still saying like, oh, that's not possible. Like I like taking like client calls with major news pubs and like having to emphasize, no, really, you don't need advertiser onboarding. It is completely automated. This is done in real time. Like people don't just flat out don't understand what is possible right now. Like they haven't really dove in and tried to play with the tools to see what they're capable of. And part of that is just the nascency of it. And part of it is sort of the like perennial integrations problem of adding new tech stacks is always messy. Like
and part of it is innovator's dilemma, right?
Absolutely.
As you get up the stack to bigger companies with more on the line, more to lose, more to evolve.
It's like I've been saying for ages now is you can replace legacy brand safety systems with a weekend and an OpenAI API key, and that has been true for months now, and that's the sort of thing where like people just are not adjusting to like, no, seriously, like what we were looking at is radical change.
What do you mean by that? Like legacy brand systems replacing it in a weekend with an OpenAI key? Like specifically, can you give proper nouns?
I got to sit with the Grape Shot folks after Oracle like brought them under the umbrella and sort of like figure out that point of how do we integrate Moat and Grape Shot's tech together. And so I got an under the hood look at a lot of how those legacy systems were an awful lot of keyword matching, of regular expressions, of gigantic inclusion and exclusion lists. All of that is irrelevant now, completely irrelevant. Like I set up a toy example a while back of I think in like 2 hours of scrape a website, dump the raw HTML, dump literally just the GARM category descriptions of each brand safety category into an LLM context window and say, give me the result for this website. And what you get is a granular, like by degree of seriousness breakdown for each category in less than a minute. And so that's the sort of thing where like, yeah, like old brand safety tech, like independent of the question of like how valid is brand safety as a concept or how useful is it, just the way the old tech works is completely replicable. There is no moat there now.
I think ad tech people in general are very conservative and pragmatic, and those can be virtues. Like they see OpenAI and like we all knew OpenAI is going to add ads, like ad tech people are like, we see the financial opportunity and how to sort of pursue it. And there are benefits to that framework. The problem is you can like miss the big one when that's your perspective. Like you're looking for the next like tweak on the existing paradigm. You're not looking for like the generational paradigm shift. And I think that that's sort of what you're talking about. And that's like the problem with AI. On the other hand, like, and that's why it's important, I think, for ad tech people to like listen to like the A16Z podcast or whatever, like just get out of like the New York ad tech type bubble and like listen to what the Silicon Valley people are saying. At the same time, obviously, we have a lot of value ad tech to offer the Silicon Valley ecosystem because we're the ones who are going to come in and be like, so this is how this actually works. And this is what marketers are going to want. And this is how you talk to them and build something they're going to use and, all of that stuff. And you need both hats.
Absolutely. I think if you can almost distill the West Coast, East Coast distinction into the concept of bottlenecks, where I think the West Coast well, mostly wants to ignore bottlenecks. They think intelligence, talent, technical capability, that's all you need. And that lets you do anything. And the East Coast is, I think, much more, I would almost say, like, rooted in reality of, like, no, like, reality is messy and difficult, and there are often human bottlenecks to doing things. But that can also be kind of a downside of getting too attached to seeing only the bottlenecks and working around them rather than when you can sidestep them. And, like, synthesizing both of those mindsets gets you to asking the question of what are the bottlenecks right now? And what are the bottlenecks going to be in the very near future? Because those are definitely different things.
That's a great framework. Michael, what are so you're building an adtech AI startup. It's January 2025 as we record this. What are the advantages of building an adtech AI startup right now? What are the disadvantages?
Good question. So I think the advantages of AI almost speak for themselves. It's frothy. It is, NFX, there's a VC who lays out the concept of the fast-moving water. We are in the fast-moving water. And I think recognizing when those inflection points happen is very important. We can get intros and a first call with awful lot of the big-name VCs. The downsides often come from the ad tech side, where a lot of those big-name VCs don't like ad tech or don't understand it or have hot takes like, isn't advertising the business model of the past? But I would say, like, the benefits of building an ad tech startup are that it is tight-knit, it is technical, it is kind of a niche where I can go out and, like, dump a pile of words and Joe Zappa will see it, and then here I am on this podcast, where, like, generally speaking, it's easier to get your voice out. It's the sort of thing where, like, I've spoken to Brian O'Kelly less than an hour in my life, and he can slide into my DMs and aggressively offer his services as an advisor and investor. Like, just the fact that there is kind of an ad tech mafia effect of when you know the industry and you know it well, like, you can do an awful lot. And it's the sort of thing where, like, you can go and get a master's or a PhD in AI. You cannot get a PhD in ad tech. Like, it is niche industry knowledge that you only really accrue as a practitioner. So you only really get the viewpoint of how to build things and how to disrupt it from having worked in it previously.
I personally actually started more in the Maritech ecosystem as a freelance trade reporter. And the reason I gravitated toward ad tech was because of this exact effect you're describing. It's like the insularity effect. Like, when you're in it and when you sort of get to know it decently well and you can talk about it relatively fluently, you, like, a compounding advantage develops pretty quickly, and you can, like, meet the people who matter because they're just, like, all hanging out on ad tech Twitter, and you can make a lot of progress in terms of meeting the people you want to partner with, or who you want to invest in you, or, you know, who you want to work with. And so, yeah, I think that the challenge is that Silicon Valley sort of looks down on ad tech, and there aren't a ton of, like, $1 billion or especially $10 billion ad tech companies, and that's like the challenge of getting the investment from those kinds of people. But the benefit is that the ecosystem that does exist, in which obviously Eric and Imperium are central, is a very tight-knit one that will, like, support people with good ideas and who get it.
Absolutely.
Michael, I did want to touch on your backstory because you're from Oklahoma, yes?
I am. Edmond, Oklahoma, small town about 20 minutes north of Oklahoma City.
And so the reason I bring this up is because I was talking with the founder CEO yesterday, and we were talking about, like, the decision to start a tech company versus, like, doing something like what I do, right? Like being a consultant. And we were saying that to be an ad tech entrepreneur, especially at our age, you and I are similar age, let's say circa 30, it's an almost irrational decision. Yeah. Like, if you were just optimizing for financial outcomes, you could work on Wall Street, you could be a consultant, like, whatever. There are many established ways for just, like, very smart people to just go make a lot of money. And I think that it's a very interesting insight into, like, founders. And you're a good example of this because it's like, I don't know, but we've talked a little bit about where we both come from. And, like, my understanding is, like, you're not exactly, like, sitting on, like, a giant pile of money from, like, intergenerational wealth. And so it's like, to do this, you had to have, like, just a very deep belief in it and a desire to, like, work on a very specific kind of problem. Because again, like, if you were optimizing for immediate financial outcomes, which would be a very natural decision, given that you don't to my knowledge, have a vast amount of intergenerational wealth, you would have gone a different route.
Yes. And I think like talking about this touches on the Moat experience, where after the Oracle acquisition, it was good for a lot of people. It made me enough money to where I could do stupid startup things for a couple of years, but not intergenerational wealth levels of money. And why I left Moat was getting into some of the backstory here. When Oracle bought it, the vision pitch as they presented it was, we are going to be the third pillar of advertising alongside Facebook and Google. That was not true. Or if that was true, they were wildly unable to execute on it. And I saw that less than a year in, specifically with when it came to negotiating the like Facebook measurement integration, where that is, and this is public, this is, and just not very well advertised, that Facebook does measure their own homework. It like they code the integration and it is QA'd and vetted by the measurement vendors. And when I saw that and understood the leverage and dynamics there, it was incredibly obvious that Oracle was never going to be a peer to Facebook. They existed really at their whim and serving them. Like once I had that insight, I carried on for another year. So I kept trying to do as much as I could to build things and to make them better. But that was, I think, sort of the point at which I knew in my heart, it's over. I don't really believe in this anymore. I don't believe in where it's going to go. And sure, I could sit and collect my very comfortable paycheck and an immense amount of job security until Oracle dissolved their entire ad division. But I chose to leave because I just didn't believe in it.
Eric, I posed this question to Michael on Twitter, and you guys are the same Myers-Briggs, I think. You said you're both INFJs, which for people who don't like weird personalities tests, which are essentially astrology for business people, INFJ means like introvert, big picture, sort of like quick to come to judgments and decisive, but the F, so I'm an INTJ, they're INFJs. The F versus T is like, do you make decisions from a feelings-oriented, like sort of gut process, intuition guided, or do you try to make it from like an just by the numbers, like impersonal sort of like objective standpoint to the extent that that's possible? And I think like in a, it's the reason I like these things because they're a shorthand for like, that's why like Eric was an entrepreneur and like now like a tech entrepreneur, and now like Michael is a tech entrepreneur and like pursuing this grand vision. And like, I like to work with them, but I also like to just like flutter in and be like, here are some ideas, because it's like, I would not be comfortable taking the level of risk that Michael, like you're taking at this juncture. I could see taking it like 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, but it's like, you need a different level of sort of gut-oriented decision-making to pursue such a big vision that would be huge if successful, but that's going to be difficult to evangelize with people.
Like, I would actually tie this back to Eric, Joe. You guys had a topic on the pod earlier around, like, how would you, like, intentionally engineer a fast, like, $10, $20 million ad tech exit? And I think we've probably had, like, 6 of those that we built internally already that we could have engineered into fast exits, and instead we're using them internally to power a bigger idea. And I've met a lot of other founders. I've talked to a lot of them, and I think a lot of them come to sort of like, why are you starting a tech company from this perspective of, oh, they have a problem that they really get stuck on, or oh, they have a product they really want to build. And I think I'm strange even by their standards because I don't really frame it in either of those ways. I'm looking at this more from the interplay of the ecosystem and like the world that I want to exist. And I look at entrepreneurship and starting a startup as, how do you build a lever that moves the world in the way you want it to move? Maybe this is cringe. Maybe we can make fun of this the same way like a lot of people make fun of Brian O'Kelly. But at the end of the day, like, I can accept that I am the kind of like rationally crazy person who this is what I do.
The Brian O'Kelly comp is actually extremely insightful because this is like one of my points about Brian is like, he's willing to be made fun of. He's like so earnest. And like when you talk to him, you're in the Brian vortex of like, he has this grand vision and he's pursuing it unabashedly. And like, to me, like, this is what great entrepreneur founders do. To be a great founder, like, you need to operate from a place of like, how should the world be? And like, how do we get from A to B? But like, not worry so much about all the intricate elements of the path. Like, you need to be like, I have a vision and the world should work this way. And it's insane that it doesn't. And I want to realize that. And like, along the way, a lot of people are going to be like, there are 700 reasons that didn't work, or, oh, it's like cringe to be so earnest or whatever it is. And you've got to just kind of be okay with being like, well, fuck those people.
I put it in the frame of praxis of having a grand vision for how the world should be. Maybe it's cringe. I think it's great. And even if you can't get to it immediately, thinking about iterative steps of how do you like test those principles on a small scale? How do you implement like what you want in a smaller sandbox? How do you prove that you're right? And then scale that up to the bigger ecosystem, to the bigger effect. And like really just this systems level thinking when it comes to like almost like narrative examples.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. One comment on the Myers-Briggs thing. When I got that answer, the INFJ, this was at almost the end of Undertone. We were a big business. I don't think we were acquired by Perion yet, but we had a high functioning executive team. It was executives. There was no founders on the team. And I remember they were all INTJs, like literally like 5 of them or something like that. And I'm this like INFJ or ENTJ, like whatever it is, like big name executives or big company executives are. It was all that, and then there was B. And I remember feeling bad and not wanting to tell anybody about it. I was just like, what's wrong with me? I'm different. And then it wasn't until just now, I'm talking like a decade later, where Joe like breaks it down. I'm like, oh, okay. It's okay to be different. Maybe that's what like makes people, kind of one thing or another thing. It's so funny. I never got why it's okay to be INFJ. I gotta like either retake it or get a refund.
That's a great anecdote, Eric. And it really speaks to the delta. And I think that my guess would be if you did a comparative analysis of like 100 executives who weren't founders and 100 founders, you would find way more Fs among the founders. Because again, to be a founder, you need to have that irrational thing in the like, I'm going to follow my gut and I'm going to follow this vision. Whereas to be an executive or, a marketing/strategy consultant, you need to have the more like, here are all the pieces and I can help you put it together. And like, you realize the vision, but you're probably not the one who's like starting from scratch and going to take the irrational bet.
It kind of ties into corporate culture. And the way I think of it is there are 2 different ways to build corporate culture, either top down, sort of like CEO led, like here's a clear vision, like here we are aligned on these principles, the AppNexus like vortex, you could say, or bottom up. And I actually think Mode was an example of bottom up corporate culture, where like Jonah's a phenomenal entrepreneur, phenomenal salesman. But I think a lot of the Mode culture actually just came from the people, from it being a lot of like early 20s, like earnest, enthusiastic, excited to learn about ads for whatever crazy reason people. And just a lot of the magic coming from just the interplay of that.
Yeah, makes sense. There was an amazing company. Jonah's still at it, which is amazing. Guys, we've been going for a long time. We should call it. Michael, this has been great. We got to have you back one day.
Happily.
Cool. Joe, you want to take us
All
home?
right. Thanks so much, Michael. Yeah, thanks so much for listening. Find us in the public square, yell at me, call us the adtech mafia, which various people have been calling us, for better and for worse. I'm not mad about it. And follow us and give us 5 stars. I mean, we have 5 ratings on Spotify now. This is ridiculous. Michael's going to give us 5 stars right after this conversation. You guys are all going to do it. I need some stars, guys. I'm hungry for your affirmation. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye, everybody.